Okay, we are beginning chapter 29 in Tanya, which is a really full chapter, lots of information and discusses a very important topic. Just to get us up to this point, to remind us how we actually got here, we are actually in the middle of discussing things that could disturb your service of God. So under the umbrella of sadness. So we started from chapter 26. The Alter Rebbe started explaining how certain things can really like disturb or act as an obstacle in your service of Hashem. And sadness is a big thing. But the thing is that there are different kinds of sadness. So firstly, the Alter Rebbe started speaking about sadness from physical things, pain and suffering, right? Perhaps even necessary pain and suffering. And the solution for that is that a person should, I'm just stating very briefly, right? That a person should remember that it's from Hashem, and not only from Hashem, but from a deeper part, a more concealed, um, closer part of Hashem that is giving him that suffering, because it's not revealed to us why it is. Then the Alter Rebbe went on to discuss that a person may feel sad as a result of his spiritual standing, the sins he has committed, the past sins, and very often this happens to him in the middle of his serving of Hashem. Like in the middle of davening, these thoughts occur to him, like, what am I doing here? I've sinned in the past. And he becomes sad as a result and doesn't serve Hashem as well. And then the Alter Rebbe spoke about sadness that comes about randomly during the day, involuntary thoughts, right? Over your present condition. Um, the Alter Rebbe gave us a solution to actually be happy about that, because it gives us an opportunity to overcome the desires of the heart, which is actually a mitzvah. And all of these up till now were different expressions or different expressions of sadness acting as a deterrent to serving Hashem. In this chapter, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain something really, really interesting, which we've of course heard about before, which also acts as a very big obstacle to serving Hashem, and that is something called Timtum Halev. Timtum Halev literally means a blocked heart, like a plugged up heart. Now, what does that mean? And this is something that we have to overcome, because we have to serve Hashem with a full heart and a full range of emotions, which is love and fear of Hashem. But if we have a blocked heart, then we're not really doing that. So what exactly is a blocked heart, firstly? And then we will discuss what the Alter Rebbe says to unblock. What is the solution, right? So the symptoms of having a plugged or blocked heart is firstly, the heart is not being affected during davening, because davening is known as avodah shebelev, like the service of the heart. And if a person is completely unaffected by his davening, that may be a symptom of timtum halev, a heart that is just not affected by the godliness that is inherent in the davening, right? Another symptom is that a person just cannot overcome their yetzer hara, even in the case of permissible activities. So we know that a sin is a sin, right? But we also discussed in the last chapter that sometimes permissible activities are not done with this for the sake of serving Hashem. They also, to a certain extent, drag the person down into klipa, right? Especially if you have an opposite intent, like your intent in the permissible activity is not to serve Hashem, but is self-serving, then for sure it drags the person down into klipa, right? But basically, the premise of a blocked heart is that a person is unable to change. A person is unable to change his nature, because the light of the divine soul and the intellect of the divine soul does not penetrate the coarseness of the body. So in other words, we've been saying up till now, mayach shalit el halev, like the mind rules the heart. But what happens in a case where a person feels he's putting all the right things into his mind, but it's just not penetrating the heart? In other words, it's not affecting the heart. The heart is as if it's covered with a very thick layer, which is essentially why it's blocked. So there's nothing wrong with the light. There's something wrong over here with the heart. There's a blockage, right? So the solution in this case is not necessarily to increase the light. Many times we say, oh, there's darkness, let's increase the light. More darkness, increase more light. But in this case, Timtum Halev is when you've actually done all you can to increase the light. You are controlling your mind, right? Because we know that we cannot control our heart, but we can control our mind, which then will affect our heart. But in this case, it just doesn't seem so, right? So in this case, the solution is not to increase the light, but in this case, it is to make the heart more receptive to the light by understanding the underlying cause. So the Alter Rebbe gives a mashal to explain this and says it's like if you have a very, very big log of wood and it just doesn't catch fire, you have to splinter the log into smaller pieces. You have to smash up the log, right? You can't just increase the fire, increase the fire. That's not going to help in this case. What will really help in the case of lighting fire to wood is to chop up the wood into smaller pieces. Because the cause of this deficiency, this blocked heart, is the arrogance of the klipa. The arrogance of klipa makes it appear inflated and greater than the divine soul and conceals its light. So we know that the nefesh elikis is for sure greater. But here we have a situation where the nefesh habahamis and the klipa within appears greater than the divine soul. So the Alter Rebbe gives us the solution. Firstly, to set aside appointed times. This is always repeated many, many times in Tanya, and really eradicates a lot of the guilt that comes from the Yetzer Hara, because guilt which comes from the Yetzer Hara is not productive and won't help you in serving Hashem. It actually prevents you from serving Hashem because it draws you down, right? As explained in previous chapters about your spiritual failings, right? So again, here the Alter Rebbe says, set appointed times to humble yourself in order to bring down the klipa and for you to shatter your perception of yourself. And we're going to explain what that means. Because when we shatter the perception of ourselves, this will reduce the arrogance of the animal soul, because our perception of ourselves is not actually the divine soul. The perception of ourselves is the animal soul. When you shatter the animal soul, you then become brokenhearted, right? Which is really literally the meaning of the word brokenhearted, means you have now shattered your heart, and the heart is letting the light shine through. You have become brokenhearted in your animal soul, and you allow the light of the divine soul to penetrate. So let's just discuss for a moment this perception of self that the Beinoni has, or potential Beinoni. The perception of himself is the animal soul, right? Our personalities are the animal soul. How do we know that it's the animal soul and not the godly soul? Because the godly soul is basically the same. It's just holy, right? The differences between all of us is our personality. That originates in the animal soul. Not to say there are not good things to our personality. They are, but it originates from the animal soul. So when we say that you are brokenhearted or disgusted with yourself, which the Alter Rebbe will talk about later, you're being disgusted or brokenhearted about your animal soul, even though your essence is godly. But your perception of yourself is not always your essence. Our perception of ourselves, when people have like insecurities or fear of judgment or limiting beliefs about moving forward in life, that's the animal soul. And that's the person's perception of themselves. So the animal soul, it's not the essence. The animal soul gives life to a person, has a very important role. and also makes a person aware of his needs. So the truth is that our needs have not really changed since we're babies, right? When a person is a baby, they know nothing more beyond the need to eat or sleep or feel good. That's the same thing that our animal soul is telling us nowadays. You need to feel good, you need to sleep, you need to eat, you need to feel comfortable. Don't go out of your comfort zone. I'm gonna protect you. Don't grow so much, right? His animal soul, your animal soul is your personality and it is in your heart, right? The main place of your animal soul is in the heart. So the godly soul is your essence, but it's really added to the animal soul. It's added to the life of the animal soul, which is why when we say in the morning, we thank Hashem for our soul, our godly soul, we should say, Elokai, neshama shenasata b'tahirai, the soul that you gave me is pure, but shenosata bi, that you put into me, you gave into me. In other words, I existed before you gave me the divine soul. We know even when a person is born, the divine soul does not fully enter the person. It's really the animal soul that is dominating. So by a boy, the godly soul begins entering by a bris, by a girl, but when she gets her name, and it only completes this journey when a person reaches the age of bar and bas mitzvah. So the main thing giving you life is your animal soul. It's your life, it's your personality, it's your perception of self. Now, tzaddikim are different. Tzaddikim are different because they are their godly soul. By a tzaddik, they are all godly soul, right? The body is something additional. A tzaddik doesn't have a Yetzer Hara. That's why Hillel Hazaken, famous Hillel Hazaken, would say when he was eating, because a person needs food to survive, he would say that he's doing a favor for the lowly and poor creature, meaning his body, when he ate. So a tzaddik, the animal soul, is in addition. By a Beinoni or potential Beinoni, the divine soul is in addition to the animal soul. So therefore, here come four tools that the Alter Rebbe gives you to humble yourself and to shatter your perception of yourself. So the first one is that you should reflect, the Beinoni should reflect on the fact that the animal soul has not changed. The animal soul is capable of desiring what is prohibited. It hasn't changed. And even if he has reached the level that he does not desire sin, in the case of a real Beinoni, right? He still does not despise evil, which in the case of the tzaddik is not true. A tzaddik despises evil, right? And this, says the Alter Rebbe, makes you even lower than the level of non-kosher animals, insects, and reptiles, which have their vitality sourced from klipa. Why are you worse than a worm? Because you were not created a worm. A worm is literally fulfilling his purpose over here in creation. You were created to overcome these desires, and at the moment, because of this Timtum Halev, because you are not able to change and you're giving in to all your desires, you are even on the level, you're worse than the level of non-kosher animals, reptiles, and insects. Again, only at appointed times. You're not thinking about this all day long, right? Now, the Alter Rebbe does bring up the point that there may be some time during, for example, during davening where the Beinoni is godly, right? And it is true service of God. We've discussed this before because he's able to reach that state at will. But nonetheless, here comes another tool. Let's say the Beinoni is really on a very, very high level. And let's say all of us, even though we're not complete Beinonis, we're potential Beinonis, right? We've grown, we've reached a certain level in life, in Avodas Hashem, right? So here comes the second technique that the Alter Rebbe says, that if you want to humble your animal soul, you should remember the sins of your youth. Now, what does this mean exactly? He explains that the sins you did when you were younger may be contributing to this situation of Tzimtzum Halev. Why? It could be that you even did tshuva for the sins of your youth. You didn't know, you reached a certain level, you now did tshuva, so you've done tshuva in the past. However, it could be that the tshuva that a person did then may not be enough for the person you are today. It was enough for the person that you were then, but it is not enough for the person you are today. Hashem wants a deeper tshuva now. You've outgrown your previous tshuva, and Hashem wants to give you the opportunity to level up, to grow more. So it's actually a good thing, right? But it also humbles the nefesh habahamis. It humbles the heart. This is why David HaMelech, by the way, David HaMelech was a tzaddik who said, Libi chalol bekirbi, my heart is empty, because he had completely eradicated his animal soul. At the same time, he also said, V'chatasi negdi samid, my sins are always in front of me. 1 second, he's a tzaddik. What do you mean his sins? Which sins are we talking about, right? So we're talking about the sins that he did in the past, that they're always there in the background. They were always there in the background. So, in other words, a person should basically do a thorough stock taking of previous sins and daily thoughts, even for permissible activities which were done not for the sake of serving Hashem. Because when you think holy thoughts, you are a vehicle for holiness. Unholy thoughts, you are a vehicle for unholiness. And ask yourself, was I a vehicle for holiness or unholiness? That's how you upgrade your previous tshuva, besides for other details which are very specific to each person according to their level. So that's already 2 tools that the Alter Rebbe has given us. So first of all, to think that you are not fulfilling your purpose, you are worse than the animals created from Klippa, and to revisit the sins of your youth. The third thing that the Alter Rebbe tells us to reflect upon in order to humble or to shatter the arrogance of the Nefesh Habahamis and of the Klippa is to reflect upon your dreams. Now, this is a very interesting topic. The dreams we dream at night are a reflection of what we think about during the day. So we say in Tehillim, Mi ya'ale bahar Hashem, who goes up to the mountain of Hashem, Neki kapayim ubar levov, someone who has clean hands and a pure heart. So the unholiness of your thoughts during the day prevents your neshama from rising up sufficiently, and you have unholy dreams. This is a very interesting topic. And when a person reflects upon this and realizes, wow, I had dreams about this and dreams about that, it's not to say that your neshama didn't rise, but didn't rise sufficiently. And this is enough to deflate, the reflection about this is enough to deflate the nefesh habahamis, which desires that which Hashem despises and causes him and Hashem to be far from one another. This is another thing to think about in order to bring down the nefesh habahamis a notch or two, right? And the other method which is brought in this parak, which is also very interesting, is to rage against the animal soul and Yetzer Hara in your mind. No one's telling you to go yell and scream out loud. It's also not meant to be done all day long, only at appointed times. But until now, until this technique, the Alter Rebbe has given us tools for intellectual contemplation. Reflect upon this, think about this. But now, this is simply about becoming angry at the Yetzer Hara. Like, you are driving me crazy, Yetzer Hara. I am angry at you, right? This method effectively deflates the animal soul very, very fast, because in truth, the animal soul has no substance. It's just air. Arrogance is based in air, right? So it shocks the Klippa and Sitra Achra into hearing the truth that the only reality is Hashem. And as a consequence, causes the Nefesh Elokis to not only hear and understand Hashem, but also to see godliness, because it sees how fast the animal soul falls apart. So here's the thing. Usually, the animal soul appears to have a lot of energy, right? it drives us, well, at least me, drives us crazy. All our desires and temptations and obstacles and, right? It appears to have a lot of energy, right? Now, this energy comes from klipa. Klipa usually gives vitality and chayas to the nations of the world, non-kosher animals, and the animal soul of a Jew, right? But how does it give vitality to all of these things? Klipa should not necessarily be able to give vitality if it's just all air. It gives life as a result of permission granted by Hashem to fulfill a mission, that of giving life to these things. Nations of the world, animals, non-kosher animals, the animal soul of a Jew. Why was it given permission to give life? In order for us to choose holiness, in order for us to overcome klipa. So therefore, it appears to be very strong and substantial. But when the Benoni fights back, Hashem automatically revokes that permission and the klipa becomes deflated. Klipa has no substance, really, and that's why it's compared to darkness. An example of this in the Torah, which the Alter Rebbe brings us, is the story of the spies, of the Meraglim, who went into the nation, into Israel to, spy out the land because they forgot about the fact that Hashem helped them up till now. And well, there are different, deeper meanings to this as well, but the end of the result is that Hashem didn't want them to go into the land, right? And when they came out, they gave a report that really invoked fear and doubt into the hearts of the people, right? And Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to really criticize them with very harsh words. And the Torah tells us that after Moshe Rabbeinu rebuked them, they like fell apart and they felt so much remorse and they became brokenhearted very quickly because they realized the truth. They realized the truth. So raging against the Yetzer Hara makes our divine soul see the oneness of Hashem, does not let the animal soul obscure the divine soul's sight, and realize the truth that you're actually a believer. So the Meraglim also in that story, they realize, oh wow, our real nature is to believe in Hashem, not to have doubts. We are maminim b'nei maminim, we are believers. Doubt is nothing more than empty words of the Sitra Achra, air. The Sitra Achra itself, Klipa itself, actually has no doubts. It has been granted permission to confuse the person. But the actual Klipa itself is fulfilling a mission. Actual Klipa itself sees the oneness of Hashem, it's fulfilling a mission to confuse the person. And the source is pure. Sometimes the subcontractors are not so pure, like the agents of the Sitra Achra and Klipa, right? But the original Yetzer Hara does not actually want the person to fail. And Alter Rebbe gives a mashal of a harlot hired by the king to tempt his son. And the harlot herself did not want the prince to fail the test. She had to act in a tempting manner, but was praying in her heart, don't fall for me, because she knew she was simply fulfilling a mission and she didn't want the prince to actually fall into her hands. It's the same thing with the Yetzer Hara. And when we rage against the Yetzer Hara, and if you want to look it up in Tanya, Alter Rebbe gives choice descriptions of what you should be saying to your Yetzer Hara. How he's so low and disgusting and raging at an appointed time. This causes the Yetzer Hara to withdraw, become deflated, and for Hashem to withdraw the permission for confusing you, for giving you life, and suddenly the Timtum Halev is gone, and there's much more clarity which comes from the divine soul. So there's a lot of information in this chapter, very practical chapter. Any questions or observations? Yes, hi, Sarah.
I'm curious what would be a good appointed time during the day because it's not something you'd want to do just before you go to sleep.
Why not? Usually the appointed time is when you go to sleep to make a cheshbon
So for
nefesh.
me, if I started revisiting what
Yeah.
I did tshuva on, then I think I would dream about that. Even if, you know what I'm saying? Like I think,
So you're overlapping two techniques. One is reflecting about your dreams, one is reflecting about the sins of your youth. You could, you
I
don't have to
think
do
one
this,
would
you
affect
don't
the
have to
other.
actually do this every day. Like, this chapter sometimes like brings about a lot of questions in people because our way in Hasidus is to really emphasize the positive. And here comes along a chapter in Tanya where the Alter Rebbe says the positive hasn't done much, so now let's reflect upon the negative, right? So it will work if it's only used in very small doses.
Mhm.
So amongst Hasidim, like traditionally, they would use the time of Farbrengen. I'm not sure. Sounds like you're giving the Yetzer Hara Musar, and Andrea said yes. Um, oh, I just lost everybody 1 second. Oh, here you are. Um, so at the time of Farbrengen, I'm not sure how this applies to women, but traditionally, if you would walk past a very good, hearty Farbrengen, you would hear men telling each other off, especially in like the times of old. And basically, that was not necessarily that was done out of a tremendous amount of Avos Yisrael. In other words, a person telling off his friend wasn't really telling off his friend; he was telling off his friend's animal soul, right? So there has to be a certain you have to be a keli for this. Like if a person is doing this in the middle of a bringing, it's because everyone was together and singing songs and becoming inspired, and then talking to the Nefesh Bahamis, which you are not my real me. Maybe you're my personality, but my essence is my godly soul, right? So I wouldn't necessarily do this every day. I would really, first of all, speak to a mashpia before doing this because every person's circumstances are different. So you have to know which technique do I use? What exactly is it do I say to my Yetzer Hara? How often do I have to do this, right? So yes, these are techniques that the Alter Rebbe gives, and it's on the Alter Rebbe's shoulders. I'm not excusing the Alter Rebbe in any way, but the practical application, each person has to find a way that works for them. And I will say that before addressing Timtum Alev, before coming to the conclusion, oh, I have Timtum Alev, try and do everything else first that Tanya has recommended. Like try and develop a love and fear of Hashem, try and think about Hashem, that the pain and suffering is from a deeper source. All the techniques that the Alter Rebbe has given us throughout every parak of Tanya. And then if you feel that it still is not reaching your heart, then you need these techniques that are specifically for Timtum Alev. Does that help you, Chaisar?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, I have a comment. I appreciate the example of the log being splintered. So what I is that what I hear you saying is that in a way, when we're brokenhearted, that's when we can actually have a change because you can't add to something that's not having an effect, but the only way to have an effect is if something is shattered, like some sort of shvirsa kalim in some way.
Yes, yes, 100%. If you look later on in Igeras HaTshuva, that's one of the ingredients for doing tshuva, which is all about change, right?
I love that.
Um, it's an ingredient. You have to become brokenhearted in order to be able to be more
Yes,
receptive to the light. Yes. So
very good. Thank
brokenheartedness in and
you.
of itself is not something to be sad about. It's a
Right.
bracha. It's like, wow, okay,
Yeah.
now I'm the Kaylee. You know that Japanese technique that a lot of people have been doing workshops about, what's called kintsugi or something. That's the way of saying, oh, you were brokenhearted. Now you're going to become even better.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So see
Yes.
every. Oh yes. Hi, Shalamis.
Hi. What if person has no desires, taiwas, like a nerd? What what happens?
There's no such thing. Everybody has desires on a level, on a certain level. That's not that is not for serving Hashem. Even if a person isn't sinning, but if their neutral activities are not l'shem shamayim, that is also has to be rectified.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Just was wondering how it applies to nerds. Okay.
Everybody has desires on their level. Okay.
Thank you.
See you all next week. Emretz Hashem.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Hannah.
Sure. Bye-bye.